The Ring of Thornbury Abbey. Chapter 1. The Photograph. I should have known that Tuesday morning would be trouble, the moment my phone started buzzing like an angry wasp at 7:30. Nobody calls a 78-year-old man that early, unless someone's died or someone's about to wish they had. Mr. Davies? The voice on the other end was crisp, efficient, and unmistakably expensive. The sort of voice that wears silk ties and cufflinks even over the phone. This is Gerald Pembroke of Pembroke, Hastings, and Whittaker. We represent the Ashworth family. I shifted in my narrow bed, pulling my wool blanket higher. Outside my window, the Scottish Highlands were doing their usual impression of a watercolor painting. All mist and heather and the sort of beautiful bleakness that makes poets weep, and tourists Instagram themselves silly. The who family? I asked, though I'd heard him perfectly well. The Ashworths of Thornbury. I'm calling regarding a certain piece of jewelry that has come to our attention. Specifically, a gold signet ring bearing the family crest. My hand, quite without my permission, moved to the ring on my right index finger. I'd worn it so long it had left a permanent groove in my skin, a little valley of pale flesh where the band sat. I'm afraid you've got the wrong fellow, I said, though my voice came out rather less convincing than I'd hoped. Mr. Davies, we have a photograph. It was published in the Highland Gazette 3 weeks ago. The article about the monastery's 70th anniversary. You're wearing the ring quite clearly in the image. Blast. That cheerful young reporter with her digital camera, and her questions about living history and community treasures. I'd thought nothing of it at the time. I'll be traveling to St. Columba's Monastery tomorrow, Pembroke continued, his tone suggesting this was not a request. We should discuss this matter in person. Shall we say 10 o'clock? I suppose the time suits me as well as any other, I said. Because really, what else could I say? My daily schedule consisted of morning prayers, tending the vegetable garden, afternoon tea with Brother Malcolm, and contemplating my mortality. I could shuffle things around. After he rang off, I sat there in the grey dawn light, turning the ring slowly on my finger. The gold was worn smooth, the engraved crest barely visible after 70 years of wear. A lion rampant, a crown, some Latin that probably meant something terribly important to someone terribly dead. I'd never stolen anything in my life. Well, except for a kiss from Margaret Porter behind the church in 1962, but she'd seemed fairly willing at the time. Chapter 2. The Lawyer from London. Brother Malcolm found me in the garden the next morning, apparently murdering a row of turnips with more violence than was strictly necessary. You're attacking those vegetables like they owe you money, he observed, lowering his considerable bulk onto the stone bench beside the patch. Malcolm was one of those cheerful, round men, who seemed to have been born middle-aged and intended to stay that way forever. Something on your mind? Lawyers, I said, driving my trowel into the earth with unnecessary force. Ah. The usual kind or the biblical kind? The expensive kind. Coming here at 10. Malcolm's eyebrows climbed toward his tonsured scalp. Whatever for? Before I could answer, the crunch of tires on gravel announced our visitor. Far too early, naturally. Lawyers probably considered punctuality a form of psychological warfare. Gerald Pembroke emerged from a sleek BMW that looked about as comfortable on our mountain road as a swan in a coal mine. He was exactly as I'd imagined. Tall, thin, somewhere in his 40s, with the sort of face that suggested he'd been born wearing a concerned expression and a three-piece suit. Mr. Davies, he said, extending a hand. Thank you for seeing me. Didn't realize I had much choice, I replied, but I shook his hand anyway. Mother raised me properly, even if she'd have been horrified to know I'd end up accused of theft at my age. We settled in the monastery's small reception room. A draughty stone chamber that Brother Malcolm optimistically called cozy, and I called medieval. Malcolm brought tea, because that's what you do when British people gather, regardless of whether you're discussing theology or larceny. Pembroke withdrew a leather folder from his briefcase, with the reverence usually reserved for holy relics. Inside was a blown-up photograph from the newspaper. There I was, grinning like an idiot next to Father Benedict. The ring clearly visible on my hand. "The Thornbury ring," Pembroke announced, as if I might have forgotten what we were discussing. "Lost in 1944 during the London Blitz. It's been part of the Ashworth family for 12 generations. Priceless. Both monetarily and sentimentally." "Priceless seems a bit much," I said, examining the photo. "It's just gold and a bit of engraving." Pembroke's expression suggested I'd just used the Magna Carta as a coaster. "Mr. Davies, the Ashworth family is prepared to be reasonable. Return the ring, and we can avoid any unpleasantness. Legal proceedings, publicity, that sort of thing." I looked at the ring on my finger, then at Malcolm, who was watching with the fascinated expression of someone observing a particularly dramatic pantomime. "What if I said no?" Pembroke blinked. "I beg your pardon? What if I said I'm keeping it?" "Then," he said slowly, as if explaining basic arithmetic to a child, "the family would pursue legal action. Theft of a historical artifact. The courts would compel you to return it, and you'd likely face criminal charges." "For wearing a ring someone gave me 70 years ago?" "Someone gave you?" Pembroke's professional composure cracked slightly. "Mr. Davies, are you claiming the ring was a gift?" "Not exactly a gift, no." I took a sip of tea, which had gone cold. More like wages never paid. Chapter 3. The Blitz, 1944. I'd never told anyone the full story. Not even Malcolm, and we'd lived in the same monastery for 15 years, which is longer than most marriages last these days. But Pembroke wanted the truth, or at least his version of it, so I supposed he'd have to hear mine. "I was 20 years old," I began. "Skinny as a rake, keen as mustard, and convinced I was going to win the war single-handedly. They made me a rescue worker. Not quite a soldier, not quite a civilian. We dug people out of bombed buildings during the Blitz." Pembroke settled back in his chair, his expression professionally neutral, but I could see his hand moving toward his phone. Probably recording everything. Fine by me. September 17, 1944. The bombing had been quieter for a while, but that night Jerry decided to remind us he wasn't finished yet. A whole row of townhouses in Mayfair came down. Beautiful old buildings, the sort with more history than sense. The memories came back sharp and clear, the way old memories do when you've spent 70 years trying not to think about them. The smell of dust and cordite. The sound of timber groaning. Someone screaming for help in the darkness. "We pulled 17 people out that night," I continued. "Living, I mean. Found twice that many who weren't. There was this one house, grander than the others. The front had collapsed entirely, but we could hear someone inside, calling out. A woman's voice." Malcolm refilled my tea without asking, and I nodded my thanks. Took us 4 hours to reach her. Every time we moved a beam, something else threatened to come down. But we got her out. Lady Elizabeth Ashworth, as it turned out. Though I didn't know that at the time. Just knew she was terrified and trapped and needed help. "My client's grandmother," Pembroke said quietly. "Is that so? Well, she was a tough old bird, I'll give her that. Broken leg, covered in dust and blood, and she still had the presence of mind to grab my hand, and press something into it before they carried her off to the ambulance." I held up my hand, the ring catching the weak morning light. She said, "Take this, boy. Hide it somewhere safe. If I don't make it, it's yours. If I do, I'll find you and thank you properly." Then she passed out, and that was that. I never saw her again. Pembroke was very still. "You're saying Lady Elizabeth gave you the ring?" "I'm saying she pressed it into my hand and told me to keep it safe. Whether that constitutes giving it to me, I suppose that's for lawyers to argue about." I smiled slightly. "That's what you people do, isn't it? Argue about things?" "Mr. Davies," Pembroke said carefully, "Lady Elizabeth survived the war. She passed away in 1962. She never reported the ring as a gift. The family assumed it was lost in the bombing. Perhaps she forgot. Perhaps she had more important things to worry about. Perhaps." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Perhaps she knew exactly where it was, and decided to let an old soldier keep the only payment he ever received for crawling through hell." Chapter 4. The Investigation. They didn't arrest me, which I took as a good sign. Instead, Pembroke departed with promises to consult with his clients and review the historical record, which I suspected was lawyer speak for figure out how to sue an old man without looking like complete bastards. Brother Malcolm waited until the BMW had disappeared down the mountain road before speaking. "Is that story true, Thomas?" "Every word." "You never mentioned you were a rescue worker. You never asked." I stood, my knees complaining as they always did these days. "Besides, it was a long time ago. Different life. Different man. Yet you still wear the ring." I looked down at it. This small circle of gold that had somehow survived bombs, decades, and now threatened to survive me. Seemed a shame not to. She told me to keep it safe. "Even if the family wants it back?" "Especially if the family wants it back." Malcolm laughed. That deep belly laugh that made the visiting tourists think he was Father Christmas on holiday. "You're a stubborn old fool, Thomas Davies. Takes one to know one, Malcolm." The story might have ended there. Or at least limped along to some sort of legal conclusion. Except that 3 days later, a different car appeared on our mountain. A vintage Bentley, the sort that looked like it had opinions about the decline of modern society. The woman who emerged was perhaps 70. Dressed in tweeds that probably cost more than my lifetime earnings. With steel grey hair, and the sort of posture that suggested she'd been taught to balance books on her head as a child. "I'm looking for Thomas Davies," she announced to Father Benedict, who'd intercepted her at the monastery gate. "Might I ask what this is regarding?" Father Benedict had perfected a tone that was simultaneously welcoming and defensive. Useful for dealing with both pilgrims and process servers. "I'm Lady Catherine Ashworth," she said. "I believe Mr. Davies has something that belonged to my grandmother." Chapter 5. Lady Catherine. We met in the same draughty room, though this time I'd convinced Brother Malcolm to light a fire. If I was going to be harangued by the aristocracy, I'd at least be warm while it happened. Lady Catherine Ashworth had her grandmother's eyes, I realized. Not the color. Hers were pale blue while Elizabeth's had been brown. But the expression. Sharp, intelligent, missing nothing. "You were expecting me," she said. It wasn't a question. "Your lawyer paid a visit. Seemed likely the family would follow." She settled into the chair with practiced grace, accepting tea from Malcolm but not drinking it. "Mr. Pembroke told me your story. About the rescue. It's true. I'm sure you believe that." I smiled. "Meaning you don't?" "Meaning it's a convenient story for a man caught wearing stolen property." She said it without heat, just stating a fact, which somehow made it worse. My grandmother never mentioned giving the ring to anyone. The family assumed it was lost in the bombing. Perhaps she had her reasons for not mentioning it. Such as, that's between her and her conscience, I suppose. We sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling in the hearth. Outside, a sheep bleated mournfully, probably complaining about the weather. Scottish sheep were great complainers. Mr. Davies, Lady Catherine said finally, that ring is worth approximately £70,000 at auction. More to collectors. But its value to my family is immeasurable. It's been passed down through 12 generations. My son should inherit it, as should his son after him. I understand that. Then you'll return it? No. Her teacup rattled slightly as she set it down. I beg your pardon? I said no. Your grandmother gave it to me. Told me to keep it safe. I've done that for 70 years. Seems like I should keep doing it. You can't possibly. She stopped, visibly composing herself. Mr. Davies, we will take legal action. So your lawyer said. This will go to court. You'll lose. The legal fees alone will bankrupt you. I'm a monk, Lady Catherine. What exactly do you think you'll bankrupt me out of? My 2 spare robes? My collection of religious pamphlets? I gestured around the sparse room. I own nothing. I am nothing. Just an old man living on a mountain, wearing a ring someone gave him a long time ago. She stared at me, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not anger, exactly. Something else. Something that looked almost like respect. Why? She asked quietly. Why keep it? You must understand how much it means to the family. I do. But your grandmother gave it to me for a reason. And until I know what that reason was, I'm keeping it. Chapter 6. The Letters. Lady Catherine left without another word, though I noticed she didn't storm out. More of a strategic retreat, really. The Bentley purred away down the mountain, leaving me to contemplate my impending legal doom. You're determined to be difficult about this, aren't you? Malcolm observed one evening over dinner. I'm determined to be right about it. I corrected him. There's a difference. Is there, though? Before I could answer, Father Benedict entered the refectory with an expression that suggested either divine revelation or severe indigestion. Thomas, he said, there's been a development. He placed a thick envelope on the table between my soup bowl and my bread. The return address was a storage facility in Surrey. Lady Catherine had this delivered by courier, Father Benedict explained. The driver said it was urgent. Inside were photocopies of letters. Dozens of them, yellowed with age, written in a cramped, elegant hand that I recognized immediately even though I'd only seen it once. 70 years ago, on a piece of paper coincidentally pressed into my palm in the darkness, together with the ring. Dear Mr. Davies, I hope this letter finds you. The hospital records indicate you were part of the rescue team that saved my life in September. I wish to thank you properly and discuss the ring I entrusted to your care. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. Yours sincerely, Lady Elizabeth Ashworth. The letter was dated October 1944. There were others. October, November, December. Into 1945, 1946. The tone changed gradually from polite inquiry to concern to something approaching desperation. Mr. Davies, I fear my previous letters have not reached you. I hope you are well. I hope you survived the war. Please, if you receive this, know that I do not seek the return of the ring for its monetary value. There is something you must understand about why I gave it to you. Elizabeth. The last letter was dated April 1947. Thomas. I will write no more. Either you have not received these letters, or you do not wish to respond, and I must respect either possibility. Know that I am grateful for what you did that night. Know that the ring was given freely, for reasons I wish I could have explained in person. Keep it safe, as I asked. Keep it always. E. I set the letters down with trembling hands. Malcolm was reading over my shoulder, his breathing heavy in the quiet room. Thomas, he said gently, did you receive any of these? No. Never. My voice came out hoarse. I moved around so much after the war. Different cities, different jobs. I suppose the letters just never found me. She tried to contact you for 3 years. And I never knew. The weight of it settled on me like stones. 70 years of wearing this ring, thinking I'd been forgotten. 70 years of Lady Elizabeth Ashworth thinking I'd chosen not to respond. Father Benedict cleared his throat. There's a note from Lady Catherine as well. It was written on heavy cardstock, the sort that probably cost more per sheet than my monthly stipend. Mr. Davies. I found these letters in my grandmother's personal effects after she passed. She kept them in a locked box, separate from her other correspondence. I did not know of their existence until yesterday, after our conversation prompted me to search more thoroughly. I believe we need to speak again. Lady Catherine Ashworth. Chapter 7. The Truth. Lady Catherine returned the next morning, earlier than I expected, as if she'd been waiting nearby for me to read the letters. This time, she brought a large leather case, which she set on the table between us with ceremonial care. My grandmother's personal papers, she explained, opening the case to reveal neat stacks of documents, photographs, and a small leather journal. I spent the night reading through everything. There's something you need to know. She withdrew the journal and opened it to a marked page. The handwriting was the same as the letters, but shakier, as if written much later in life. This is from 1960, Lady Catherine said. 2 years before she died. She began to read aloud. I have been thinking about Thomas Davies again. I wonder what became of that young man who crawled through hell to save my life. I wonder if he ever understood why I gave him the ring. James would have been furious if he'd known. Dear James, gone these 5 years now. Who never understood why I sometimes seemed melancholy during autumn. How could I explain? How could I tell him that every September, I thought of that night? Of Robert? Robert, my dear brother. Wearing that ring when he left for France in 1940. Robert, who died at Dunkirk before I could tell him I forgave him for our foolish argument. Robert, whose ring I wore on a chain after the army sent his effects home. Robert, whose ring I pressed into a young soldier's hand in the darkness, because in that moment, pulling me from the rubble, Thomas Davies reminded me so much of him. I told the rescue worker to keep it safe. Keep it always. Perhaps what I meant was, keep Robert safe. Keep that memory of courage and sacrifice safe. Let someone good wear it, someone who crawls through darkness to save strangers. I never told the family the ring wasn't lost. Let them think it buried in rubble. The truth was more complicated. I gave it to someone who deserved it more than our family ever had. Someone who earned it with blood and dust and bravery. I hope Thomas Davies kept it. I hope he wore it proudly. I hope he knew, even without my letters reaching him, that it was his by right. Lady Catherine closed the journal. The room was silent except for the crackling fire. Your grandmother had a brother, I said finally. It wasn't a question. Robert Ashworth. He died at Dunkirk in 1940. The ring had been his before. She paused. before my grandmother claimed it from his effects. She gave it to me because I reminded her of him. Yes. I looked down at the ring, seeing it properly for the first time in 70 years. Not as wages for a night's work. Not as a gift from a grateful survivor. But as something more profound. A memorial. A way of keeping someone alive. I'm sorry, I said quietly, for not responding to her letters. For never knowing. You couldn't have known. The war displaced so many people. Lady Catherine reached across and, very gently, touched the ring on my finger. Mr. Davies. Thomas. I came here angry. Convinced you'd stolen something precious from my family. I was wrong. The ring is still yours by law. Perhaps. But it's yours by something more important than law. She withdrew her hand. My grandmother wanted you to have it. She tried for 3 years to tell you why. I think she'd want you to keep wearing it. Your family can learn to live with disappointment. A small smile crossed her face, the first I'd seen from her. We're aristocracy. We're rather good at it. The lawsuit? I'll tell Pembroke to withdraw it. The ring is yours, freely given, as my grandmother intended. She paused. Though I wonder if I might ask something in return? Anything. Tell me about that night. About saving her. My grandmother never spoke of the Blitz, never discussed what happened. I'd like to know. So I told her. Every detail I could remember about that September night in 1944. The darkness, the dust, the sound of Lady Elizabeth's voice calling for help. The 4 hours of careful, terrifying work to reach her. The moment her hand found mine and pressed the ring into my palm. She was brave, I said. Terrified but brave. She kept talking while we worked, kept telling us jokes, dreadful puns, anything to keep our spirits up. And when we finally got her out, when they were carrying her to the ambulance, she looked back at me and smiled. What did she say? She said, "Thank you for finding me in the dark." Lady Catherine's eyes were wet. That sounds like her. Chapter 8. The dedication. The lawsuit was withdrawn. The Ashworth family, through Lady Catherine's influence, issued a statement saying the matter had been resolved amicably. Which I supposed was aristocratic speak, for we've decided not to sue the old monk after all. But the story didn't end there. 3 months later, Lady Catherine returned to St. Columba's Monastery with her son. A tall man in his 40s who had his great-grandmother's eyes. And a photographer from the Times. "We'd like to make a donation," she announced, "to the monastery. In honor of my grandmother, Lady Elizabeth Ashworth, and in thanks to Thomas Davies for his service during the war." The donation was substantial enough to repair the monastery's roof, update the heating system, and establish a small scholarship for young people studying theology. But more importantly, it came with a request. "We'd like to create a memorial," Lady Catherine explained, "here at the monastery. To honor the rescue workers of the Blitz. The men and women who crawled through rubble to save strangers." She showed me the design. A simple stone plaque to be mounted in the monastery garden, listing names of rescue workers who'd never received formal recognition. My name was on it, along with dozens of others. "And we'd like to include this," she added, producing a photograph of her grandmother from 1940, before the war had etched its marks on her face. "With a dedication." The dedication read, "In memory of Lady Elizabeth Ashworth, 1910 to 1962, and her brother, Robert Ashworth, 1915 to 1940, and in gratitude to Thomas Davies and all who served, who found light in darkness and courage in rubble." "There's one more thing," Lady Catherine said, reaching into her bag. She withdrew a small box and handed it to me. Inside was a second ring. Simpler than the Thornbury ring, but beautifully crafted. An inscription ran along the inside. For Thomas, who kept it safe. E.A. 1944. We had it made from my grandmother's notes, she explained. She designed it herself, back in 1947, hoping her letters would eventually reach you. She never had it made, but I thought, well, better late than never. I couldn't speak. Malcolm, standing beside me, had to do the honors. He accepts, Malcolm said gruffly, his own eyes suspiciously bright. With gratitude. Chapter 9. The photograph. The memorial was dedicated on a bright September morning, exactly 70 years and 2 weeks after the night I pulled Lady Elizabeth Ashworth from the rubble of her Mayfair townhouse. A small crowd gathered. The monastery's residents, some locals from the village, a few journalists, and several members of the Ashworth family. Lady Catherine gave a speech about courage and sacrifice. Her son read a letter his great-grandmother had written to his grandfather in 1944, describing the night of the bombing. And I, at the ripe old age of 78, wearing both rings now, the Thornbury ring on my right hand, the memorial ring on my left, found myself the subject of photographs for the second time in a year. This time, though, I knew what to say when the young reporter asked why I was smiling. Because someone once told me to keep something safe, I said. And for 70 years, I did. And now I know why. What was the reason? She asked, pen poised over her notebook. I looked at Lady Catherine, who nodded. Because sometimes, I said, the things we save end up saving us right back. The photograph ran in newspapers across Britain the next day. An old monk on a Scottish mountain, wearing 2 gold rings, standing beside a memorial to people who'd crawled through hell to pull strangers from the darkness. And somewhere, I like to imagine, Lady Elizabeth Ashworth was smiling. That evening, after the visitors had departed and the monastery had settled into its usual quiet routine, I sat in my small room, watching the sun set over the highlands. Malcolm knocked and entered without waiting for an answer, carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey that someone had given the monastery for medicinal purposes. Medicinal, he said firmly, pouring generous measures. For shock. Very traumatic day, being declared a hero at your age. I'm not a hero. Tell that to Lady Catherine. Tell that to everyone who read about you today. He raised his glass. To Lady Elizabeth. To Lady Elizabeth, I echoed. And to her brother Robert. And to all the others who didn't make it home. We drank in comfortable silence. You know, Malcolm said after a while, you could have sold that ring 70 years ago. Could have had a very different life. Yes. Easier life, probably. Probably. So why didn't you? I turned the Thornbury ring on my finger, feeling the familiar grooves worn by 7 decades of wear. Because she told me to keep it safe. Because a promise made in darkness is still a promise. And because. I paused, searching for words. Because some things are more valuable than their weight in gold. Such as memory, honor, keeping faith with someone you saved once, a long time ago. Malcolm nodded slowly. You're a strange old man, Thomas Davies. Takes one to know one, Malcolm. We finished the whiskey and sat watching as darkness settled over the mountains. 2 old men in a monastery on a hill, keeping safe the memories of those who'd come before. And on my finger, 2 rings caught the last of the light. One earned through courage, one given through gratitude. Both worth more than all the gold in England.